Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Tech Motoring. On today's episode we're going to be talking with my 1 year experience with my Tesla Powerwalls. We're going to be talking about how well they've worked, how much money they've saved us, and how much money they're going to be saving us in the near future. So make sure you stay tuned, hit that subscribe button. Let's dive in and take a look at my setup. Alright everybody, so as you can see right behind me I have my two Tesla Powerwalls right here along with my Tesla gateway that basically controls everything that we have. We do have solar up on our roof. On the roof we have 5.92 kilowatts of panels on our roof. It's 16 370 watt panels that we've had for a little over 4 years now. Now, I'm going to be talking about my 1 year experience with my Tesla Powerwalls. We got these installed pretty much June of 2023. Now it's the end of 2024. But what I want to do is show you basically from June of 23 to July of 24, show you my 1 year experience, what we basically produced with the panels, what we saved in the batteries, how much we reused for our house, and how much money that is potentially saving us because of we're doing a battery backup storage now instead of just having solar to the house, and then whatever we have excess we send it back to the grid, because we don't really get very good numbers when we send the electricity back to the grid. So let me turn you around here. You could take a look at what we have here, and we'll go and look at some numbers in a little bit. All right, so as discussed, these are our two Powerwall 2s. So Powerwall 2s are 13.5 kilowatt hours each. So we have two of those, which gives us about 27 kilowatt hours of usable energy for the house. Now 27 kilowatt hours is plenty to, get through some bad storms. If you happen to, have a bad storm roll through, knocks out power in your neighborhood, you have some energy stored for your house to get through the storm. This way you can keep your refrigerator going, maybe even run, your air conditioning or heat if you needed to through that, and some other necessities during that time there. So we have two of these batteries here. As I was mentioning before, right above this roof here, we have 16 solar panels that equate to about 5.92 kilowatts of total energy capacity, or basically what they can do at the full maximum capacity of all of them. Of course, that's only theoretical and only done in labs, so it's not really something that you see all the time with those panels, but we do get somewhere between 20 and 35 kilowatt hours a day, depending on the time of the year and depending on the weather and so on and so forth. And we decided to put the Tesla Powerwalls outside of our house just for saving room in the house. We kept them outside, and here's a good spot for them because they don't get that much sun. In fact, the sun, as you can see, is already gone. It's just about a little after 12 in the afternoon. The sun is already past the house, and now these will be in the shade for the rest of the day. So in the morning they get hit by the sun a little bit, but then in the afternoon when it's the hottest, they will actually be in the shade. And that's actually kind of part of the reasoning why I put them here as well, because they'll be pretty much shaded for most of the day, or at least through the hottest parts of the day. So as you can see here, we have our conduit coming out of our house. This is from our solar panels here coming down into this. Now this is our Enphase Envoy IQ combiner box. I've done some videos in the past on this equipment and how this all works, but this is just kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at here. So all the solar panels come down into this box right here, and then from here this all runs over to our gateway. So the gateway is what controls pretty much everything. So anything that comes in from the grid goes through the gateway. Anything that goes into the house goes through the gateway. Solar panels obviously have to go through the gateway. So the gateway is kind of the brains of everything here, and that basically determines where all the energy goes at what moment in time. And there's not much to see in here, but I can open this up for you real quick. And as you can see, you do have your main disconnect in here, which is a 200 amp main disconnect, which is the same as what my house is. And we have our circuits here that we could turn off each individual circuit. So if I want to turn off my solar, if I want to turn off each of the batteries, they're all right there inside of this panel. So really nice setup. The people that installed this did a really good job. Obviously, you see your conduit here that goes down to your power walls here, and then the power walls link to each other kind of like in an internal fashion, which is kind of cool. So this way you don't have separate conduits coming from each of your batteries. And if I ever wanted to add another battery, I can always add another battery to the pad here, and then that would just link up to this one, and then so on and so forth, which is really cool. And they would all run through that conduit into the gateway. So pretty much that is our setup here. We'll close this box up, and as you can see, this box is pretty weathered at this point because it's been over 4 years that we've had solar on the house. And this was a little over a year ago that we did the Tesla Powerwalls. And I'll tell you something, they've done quite a bit of saving us money, but they're actually going to be doing a lot more saving us money in the near future. So let's dive into that. Let's go up to the studio and let's talk about how much money that we've actually saved from having the batteries, even with a really cheap electricity rate at the moment, and how much is going to save for us in the near future.
All right, everybody. Well, you join me down here in the studio now where we are going to be going over our numbers for owning our Tesla Powerwalls for an entire year. So we're going to be looking at numbers from July 1st of 2023 up until June 30th of 2024. So exactly 12 months span of owning our Tesla Powerwalls for that timeline. And I'm going to put all that stuff up here on the right side of the screen so you can take a look at it as we go through what we've produced, what we've put into the battery, roughly how much money we've saved in that process by basically storing it for ourselves versus us sending it back to the grid. And we'll go over that initially to talk to you about why that's important for me to not send it back to the grid versus storing it for myself for future use. So let's start there actually before we dive into the numbers of the Powerwall. So for those of you who follow the channel and have seen my many years of owning solar and the production and how well it's been doing and the amount of time it's going to take for us to pay back all the solar and stuff like that, well, last year I ended up jumping onto the opportunity to get a Tesla Powerwall. And the reason for that was because of how poorly, that's the best word for it, how poorly our electricity company treats solar customers. And I'll explain why. First off, we have what they call a standby fee or something every single month, what we pay depending on the size of our solar system on our roof. So the bigger the system, the bigger this standby fee is, just because we have solar. So that already basically eats into our costs, our savings of owning and having solar on our roof, is having this fee that we have to pay for every month. And their reasoning behind that is, well, because you're not paying as much for solar, you're not paying as much for the support and the maintenance that has to go into supporting the electrical grid. Okay, I get that, but we're also supporting the electrical grid in other ways, like we're sending power back to the grid. So for instance, in the middle of the summertime, when everybody's running their air conditionings, which it is South Carolina, it gets hot here, a lot of people run their air conditionings at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. When they're all running their air conditionings, I'm producing enough electricity to send back to the grid to help support the grid in that way. So then you would probably think, well, that's fine because you're getting a 1-to-1, right? So you're sending it back and you're getting paid at least the same amount that what your cost is for taking it from the grid. That is also incorrect in my case. We're actually only getting paid about 1/3 of the cost. So that means that if we buy electricity for 10 cents a kilowatt hour, we sell it back to them for like 3.3 cents per kilowatt hour, give or take. Even though we produce electricity, that's the same electricity that they give to us, we're only getting 1/3 of what it's worth. And that's not fair to me, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to go with the Tesla Powerwall. Also to make us more independent of the grid, number one. So this way, if we do have power outages, since we do live in a hurricane-prone area, literally yesterday, right before filming this, we actually had a power outage here. One of the first and only long-duration power outages we've ever had since I've lived in this house for almost 10 years. And it lasted well over an hour. And I know that doesn't seem very long duration for a lot of people, but considering where we live, that was a long duration for what we've experienced in the past. Usually we get some that last 6 to 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And even when we had hurricanes here, we've been very fortunate to not lose power during those hurricanes. And in fact, the other side of our neighborhood actually would lose power more often than we did, which is really weird and I don't get it, but we seem to have chosen the right side of the neighborhood. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that even though we have solar on our roof, we get dinged by our electricity company for having solar. And even though we send excess solar back to the grid, we're also getting dinged on how much we're getting reimbursed for that solar to help stabilize the grid. And so that didn't sit right with me, and that's why we ended up going with the Tesla Powerwall. Now let me also explain our current cost per kilowatt hour and also what's going to be happening next year potentially. So right now we have on-peak, off-peak seasons. We don't have on-peak, off-peak during the day. We don't have, a few hour window where it's going to be on peak and then the rest of the day is off peak. We don't have any of that at this point in time. We have on-peak, off-peak seasons. So on-peak is the 4 months during the summer, which is about 12 cents a kilowatt hour, which is super cheap. And then in the winter time, or the other 8 months of the year, so not the winter, it's really spring, fall, and winter, we have basically our off-peak, which is 10 cents a kilowatt hour, which is really super cheap. We actually have really cheap electricity here in this part of South Carolina. But next year, due to a class action lawsuit that's coming to an end that actually froze the cost of electricity prices for 4 years, we are now going to be moving forward with different electricity rates. And right now, the proposed electricity rates are going to be more in line with what you would see for the nation's average. So they're going to have on-peak and off-peak rates during the day now. So during the winter time, they're going to be on peak in the mornings, between, I think it's 6 and 9 a.m. if I'm not mistaken. And then during the other times of the year, depending on the seasons, and I'm not sure exactly what the schedule looks like yet, but they're going to have the peak from, I think it's 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., meaning that during the peak of the day, you're going to be getting hit with a higher rate. Not only a higher rate, but also a demand fee. Now, if you don't know what the demand fee is that you pay a certain dollar amount per kilowatt of energy used, not kilowatt hour, per kilowatt. So let's say you're charging your car during this demand time, right? And you're charging at 11 kilowatts and you're charging your car, you'll get a fee at 11 kilowatts times whatever that fee is. And I think, if I remember correctly, is about $9, which means that your bill would go up at least $99 that month just because you used an on-demand peak charge during those peak hours. And I don't agree with this for residential. This makes more sense for sometimes commercial or whatnot, but not for residential. This is not good for people who need to use that stuff during those times, right? People make dinner at 5 or 6 o'clock, and if they're cooking for an hour, why should they be hit with some sort of demand charge? Now, of course, keep in mind this is based off of the whole month. So if you do 11 kilowatts every single day, you're only going to be paying that fee once for that month. But that's still a lot more than what people would normally pay for their electricity. A $100 demand fee could be half or even 75% of what an electricity bill is right now. And so I don't agree with that. But thankfully, since I've bought a Powerwall, I could take advantage of this situation. So the idea now with the Powerwall is to be able to charge up the Powerwall when we have these off-peak hours, which they're talking as low as about 7 cents a kilowatt hour, charge the Powerwall up from the grid, and then use that to coast through the demand period, which means that my demand charge would be basically zero for the entire month because I'm doing this off of my own power. Between the battery being fully charged from the grid at a cheap rate and the solar producing at that time, we will actually be independent from the grid for those on-peak hours. So that's the goal for me moving forward. In 2025, when these rules take effect, assuming that this is the one that they're going to push, which it definitely seems like it is, when we have these on-peak demand charges, we're going to try to do as best as we can to avoid them and make sure that we are saving as much money as possible by utilizing the Powerwall. So let's talk about what we've saved, what we've done, and talk about some of the things that we've experienced owning our Tesla Powerwall. All right, so let's dive into what we're looking at here. And so we see the first one here is our home from that date range there of 12 months, we can see that we used as our house 11.7 megawatt hours of energy. And we could see where that came from. So 31% of that came from solar, 3.7 megawatt hours. 23% came from the Powerwall, 2.8 megawatt hours. And if you're wondering how that works, what it's saying is that the Powerwall supplied energy to our house 23% of the time. Now that energy could have gotten into the Powerwall two ways. It could have gotten into the Powerwall through solar, or it could have charged the Powerwall from the grid. It depends on, you know, which method that you're using your Powerwall. Since we sort of use the Powerwall in a storm saver way. So if we have like an upcoming storm and the Tesla Powerwall says, hey, you have a storm coming, there's a chance of a power outage, let me charge up your Powerwall in advance of that storm. So your Powerwall charges up in advance of the storm from the grid and says, hey, in case you lose power, instead of being at like 20% or 25%, what we're going to do is we're going to charge you up to, almost 100%. So this way, if you do lose power during the storm, your battery is fully charged and ready to go and get you through that storm and having power that entire time. So that's why that number looks a little weird, but 31% from solar, 23% from Powerwall, that makes 54% was basically from the Powerwall or solar, 46% from the grid. So that means roughly half of our energy usage in our house here is solely from the panels. And that's pretty decent if you ask me. That means that more than half our energy is renewable and we're not paying for the other half from the grid. And keep in mind that this house is fully electric. We don't have gas or any other, types of fuel here. It's strictly electric, and we have multiple electric vehicles. So we're charging those up as well. That is our fuel. We're not paying for gas outside of this to fuel up our cars. So once again, 100% electric house with electric transportation, and we're only paying for roughly half of our electricity costs every year from the grid. So pretty good. So let's move on to the next step here. We're going to skip the vehicle tab because the vehicle tab is not accurate. And what I mean by that is the vehicle tab is calculated based on your usage of the Tesla vehicle charger, the Tesla wall connector downstairs. And since I don't use that as my sole charging method, this number is not going to be accurate whatsoever. I do have other EV chargers or EVSCs that I use to charge my vehicles. As you know, if you follow this channel, I do tests. I test a lot of those chargers as well. So a lot of my charging is actually done from other chargers, which would actually fall under the home category in this case. So you won't see that under the vehicle. So basically anything you see under vehicle, if you just add it to home, that's pretty much the percentage or the proper percentage for that. So just keep that in mind. If you see vehicle there, just add that to the home. It's pretty much the same thing. So on this slide, you can see this is our Powerwall discharge and charge usage. So this means anything that our Powerwall discharged out and anything that we got back from the Powerwall. So according to this, it says it charged from solar 97% of the time and from the grid 3% of the time. Once again, when we're charging for those incoming storms, we're going to top off the battery, make sure you're good for the storm. That's pretty much what that 3% from the grid is. We've charged the battery from the grid a little bit. As you can see, our home and once again, vehicle used about 99% of that energy. All right, so here is our solar production. This is the really cool thing about the Tesla Gateway is it actually calculates everything coming in from the solar. It's just really, really nice to see all of these statistics here. So as you could see, we've gotten 7.8 megawatt hours or 7,800 kilowatt hours of energy that we produced last year. So from July 1st to June 30th. So that is pretty good. And as you can see where it went. So the home used about fully 47% or really 49% if you add in the vehicle. 48% went to the Powerwall, meaning that 49% we used in real time. That means it went from the solar directly to the house without going through the battery first. And then the other 48% of our solar production went into the battery first before we used it again. So that's what the difference is between that. It doesn't all go through the battery and then go to the house. It actually will skip the battery when the house demands the electricity. So everything comes from solar to the house first. If it can't go any more into the house, then it will go to the battery. And if for some reason both of those are are satisfied, it will then go off to the grid. And as you can see at the very bottom there, we sent out roughly 104 kilowatt hours of energy to the grid. So we did send some back, like I was mentioning before, during those couple of months where we had excess energy usage. We charged up the battery, the house was satisfied. It did send some back to the grid, so roughly 104 kilowatt hours of energy that we could have used for ourselves had we had a place to put it. And the last one is the grid tab here, which shows us the amount of energy that we sent back to the grid and the amount of energy that we took from the grid. So we could see here roughly 99% of our energy went to our house or our vehicle. Once again, basically the same numbers. 1% went to the Powerwall, so that was when we were in preparation for an upcoming storm. The Powerwalls decided to top themselves off in preparation. And at the bottom, you can see we exported that 0.10 megawatt hours, or about 100 kilowatt hours from solar. As we saw before, we had some excess solar, battery was charged, and the house was satisfied, so it sent some back. And so that's what we sent back to the grid. All right, everybody. Well, I hope this video helped you out. I hope it was interesting, at least, to kind of give you an idea of my particular situation when it comes to our solar usage, our Tesla Powerwalls, how much we're saving, how much we're utilizing. So as you can see, a lot of the energy that we are taking in from solar is being stored into our Powerwalls. Very little bit is actually being sent back to the grid. And that being said, that saves us a lot of money because we're not sending it back to the grid, getting 1/3 of the cost, and then taking it back from the grid at full cost. So now at nighttime, we're trying to get through the entire night basically on what we've stored in our battery from the day. And so that's really big savings for us right there. And in the future, when they go to these on-peak, off-peak hours that they're currently discussing, we'll be able to save even more money. And I believe we actually might even be able to lower our electricity bill even more, even with having a higher electricity costs and a demand charge and the on-peak, off-peak hours. I think that we can get away with saving ourselves even more money. Well, anyway, if this video helped you out, make sure you give it the thumbs up below. Make sure you like it. Subscribe to the channel. We have a lot more videos about our solar, about our Tesla Powerwalls right here on Tech Motoring. And of course, we're going to be doing a follow-up video next year when our electricity rates actually do change, when they finalize the numbers and they talk about exactly what's going to be happening. We're going to have a video about that as well and how it will affect me and exactly what I'll be doing to combat that, to save even more money with my solar and my Powerwalls. Thanks again for watching today's episode. We'll see you on the next one. And remember, welcome to the future and welcome to Tech Motoring. We'll see you soon.